Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Parliament Podcast. I am your host, Andy Sagadan, online managing editor of Temple Law Review Volume 91. On today's episode, we welcome 2018 Temple Law grad and current Equal Justice Works fellow Tracie Johnson. Tracie will be speaking with us about the work she's been doing with community legal services around Pennsylvania's Clean Slate program. We will also discuss some of the unique challenges women of color face when seeking post-conviction employment. We hope that you find our discussion informative and enjoy. We are nothing short of thrilled to welcome Tracie Johnson to the podcast today. Tracie is certainly the most recent Temple grad we've ever had. She graduated just last year, and she is currently a Equal Justice Works Fellow working at Community Legal Services here in Philadelphia. She's here to speak with us about Pennsylvania's Clean Slate program, which went into effect just before the new year. And so we have a great deal to talk about. And so without further ado, welcome Tracie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be a part of this. Thank you for the invitation.
So I know we have a lot to talk about Clean Slate, about what you've been doing, and about what kind of what the options are out there. But I do want to start with your fellowship, because I think that's really interesting, and I think it plays into a lot of what the work you've been doing in the past few months. So I was looking at your fellowship online, and I looked at your project, and you're focusing on helping, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, you're focused on helping young women of color with criminal records find access to employment opportunities in areas such as childcare, healthcare, cosmetology, and your contention is that job opportunities for individuals with criminal records often lead towards kind of stereotypical male-oriented positions such as truck driving, such as warehousing. So I guess how did this issue come onto your radar, and what drew you to it to the point where you kind of wanted to build your fellowship around it?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, during my 2L summer, I worked at Community Legal Services as a certified legal intern, and I was on the Youth Justice Project there. And so I worked kind of between the employment unit and the SSI unit. So I was helping young people clear up their juvenile records and their adult records, while also helping them maintain or gain access to Social Security benefits. But through the expungement work, the criminal records work, I was able to go to expungement clinics and, represent people as a certified legal intern in court. And through having the conversations with young people, a lot of them were young women of color, and there was a common thread or trend of young women wanting to go back to school, of young women being the primary caregivers of their families and wanting to kind of change the trajectory of their lives and their family lives. So they wanted to do meaningful work and get into high growth fields, which is why they wanted to further their education. And so I was noticing trends into how they came into contact with the justice system, which kind of reflected a lot of the research around, histories of trauma and all of these different things that intersects for women of color in particular. And so and speaking of what their dreams were, these were women who wanted to go back to school to become nurses, who wanted to become home health aides, who wanted to own their own hair salons, and so they wanted to go to cosmetology school and get their cosmetology license. And so that's where the area of licensing denials became a real thing. Like, okay, that's a barrier. And I was also noticing, so one part of it is dealing with women who have criminal records. That doesn't necessarily mean they've been incarcerated before, but they're still facing barriers to employment because they have a criminal history that shows up. And the other part of it is looking at women who are in reentry, who have had to do some time behind the walls and are coming home and have a variety of different issues that they're struggling with. But in talking to reentry support providers, time and time again, I've heard that women feel like they're not being reflected by the support being offered. So they're not being offered jobs and things in areas that they want to work in. So they're not being offered jobs. They're being offered jobs, as you mentioned, to do truck driving or warehousing or blacksmithing, but that's not necessarily what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And also, if we're looking at statistics about how a lot of women who come into contact with the criminal justice system have really severe histories of trauma. And so another part of me was thinking about what does it mean for women who have histories of trauma to be in spaces that aren't really friendly, not that are really dominated by a male population and doesn't have a culture that may be um, as aware of how to deal with people with trauma. And so I thought about that too. Again, like the intersecting needs of women who have criminal justice contact. And so my project became important is because I wanted to really do something that meaningfully looks at what does criminal justice reform and efforts mean for women. Because I think if you try to look at it as a whole, you don't really tap into the unique and specific needs of women and women of color in particular. In a roundabout way, all of these different kind of threads and observations led me to want to really do this project to help fight legal barriers to make sure that the needs of women of color are being specifically met, to, talk to reentry support providers, to do work that allows for access to employment. So that's helping clear up records to the extent possible, and really advocating with employers about what they can and cannot consider. And so um, that's basically kind of what led me to want to do this work through my fellowship.
Sure, and
And I
you
wanted to mention that it's an Equal Justice Works Fellowship sponsored by Greenberg Traurig.
excellent. And so, and you just mentioned, and I'm gonna have you, I guess, you touched on some of this, but your project also intersects with expungements, and as you mentioned, licensing denials, which you mentioned is a barrier, particularly if you want to start your own business for cosmetology, for instance. And I'm curious, we're going to talk mostly about Clean Slate today. I guess I'm curious as to
Right.
A, how your work, or how I guess this passion or this interest has intersected with Clean Slate, and I guess we'll get more to that as we go on. And also, I guess maybe you talked about obviously how a lot of the women who are in these positions don't feel as though the resources available to them are as adequate or maybe fit them as well as they might fit male counterparts. I guess so. So I guess how transitioning from our conversation about your project to Clean Slate, I guess how have you seen that kind of intersect and the people that you might help with your job, your project, kind
Yeah.
of intersecting with this?
So for the workaround, like you just said, you put up the cosmetology licensing, which is a huge thing. Um, Clean slate sealing means that licensing boards can't access or use the records, because that will be sealed from them. And so that is something that's going to prove important for women who have been facing denials because of their record, because it was available to be seen, because Clean Slate helped more people have a greater chance of sealing what's on their record than before. There's a greater chance of licensing boards not being able to see the record because of what Clean Slate is able to reach now. Um, and Clean Slate will also seal automatically a lot of things that we would have to, do expungements for ourselves.
Hmm.
And so the automatic sealing, the automatic expungement is really going to help when that goes into effect, when that part of Clean Slate goes into effect. But there might still be some need to do expungement work at CLS, like to actively do it ourselves. For instance, for diversionary programs, like once they are completed, those will not be auto clean slated,
Hmm.
and so that's something that we're going to have to still do an expungement for. But that's fine because the volume of everything that we have to do expungements for will slow down because Clean Slate will be able to auto slate so many things, auto um, clear so many things.
Hmm.
Um, so I think in that way that's going to prove to be more helpful. And particularly when you're talking about, like, again, the issues that women of color are facing, and the conversations that I've had for the work that they want to go into, the issues of licensing has been a thing. And so Clean Slate is going to stop licensing boards from being able to see those records. I think that that's going to be a real benefit,
And you just touched on
but particularly for people who records weren't eligible for expungement.
certainly, and you just talked about I guess expungements and automatic expungements, and I want to get to that, and I guess how it intersects, because for people who don't know what Clean Slate is, I think maybe it's helpful to say what it isn't. And I think from my understanding, it is an expungement. I guess according to
No.
the CLS website and other things I've read, it's essentially convictions are sealed through Clean
from
Slate.
public view.
Correct. It's not public view. You can't see it on a background search, for instance. But say you're in police or courts or prosecutors, they can all see it. And I guess those who have their records under sealed under Clean Slate, of course, can also pursue expungements. So can you talk a little bit about I guess the difference? Obviously, the expungements and Clean Slate are different, but I guess how maybe the people who are pursuing both kind of intersect, and I guess the kind of work that you do in that regard, or your colleagues do in that regard.
So yeah, like you said, clean slate just makes it so that the record isn't available for public view. And as you mentioned, law enforcement agencies can still see it. Through FBI background checks, it can still come up. And if some type of federal law is being applied, like if the criminal records, um, it's governed by some type of federal law when it comes to employment, it may come up in that particular aspect as well. But in every other context, it cannot
Mm-hmm.
context. It cannot. Whereas with expungements, that's destroying a record, and so it can't be seen at all. Um, but basically, I think you were asking more about if you're trying to pursue both. Um, I guess for folks who want to pursue both, they want the expungements because that destroys the record versus just making it not publicly available. Um, but like I said, a lot of things will be automatically expunged through Clean Slate, but there's some things that can't be. Like, so some things need to be expunged and will not get auto Clean Slated. I think I mentioned the diversionary programs that were completed will have to do that because we'll need like the completion letters and all that stuff to attach to it. But most info that would be expunged will be auto seal. I'm sorry if I'm just
No,
repeating
no,
the
it's okay.
same answer.
I guess what kinds of things do you anticipate or will be auto expunged as opposed to auto sealed?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So let me think. So I know. I think basically everything besides like I think that's what
Okay.
I was saying. Like basically everything besides like particular things um that have to that we have to do an expungement for because it can't be auto clean slated. But I think the only example I could come up with that I can speak of right now is the diversionary program
Gotcha.
stuff. But other than that, the auto expungement. Other than that, those things can be automatically expunged. I'm sorry if
Understood.
I'm confusing you.
No, no, that's quite right. And I guess moving in a little deeper, I guess conviction sealing eligibility went into effect on December 26th and includes nonviolent first degree misdemeanors, simple assaults, a lot of other different kinds of convictions, not including violent or sex crimes. And so long as the individual has to be not have been convicted in the past 10 years. And a major point, and it's a point that I've seen on the CLS website a few different places, is no fines and no costs owed. And that's one of the things, I guess, in the CLS guidance to people who might be wanting to petition for anything right now. It's A, figure out if you owe anything, and B, pay it out. I guess in your dealings, has that been a major hurdle or something that, as kind of a preliminary matter, as we're only a month or so in, that
Yeah.
it's been, I guess, a big part of getting things up to speed?
That has been a major hurdle because a lot of the times people forget that they have fines and fees, or they can't remember the amount, or the amount was really high, and because of their level of income, they haven't been able to pay it off over time, given all of the other responsibilities that they have. So there are a number of reasons why their fines or fees have not been cleared yet, or have been taken care of yet. But it is an eligibility requirement of Clean Slate for fines and fees on the particular case that you're trying to for the particular charges that you're trying to get sealed to be taken care of. You can't have outstanding fines and fees. And so even before the law went into effect, we really tried to screen people beforehand to catch that. So we tried to think of, okay, who can we help reduce their fines and fees right now before Clean Slate even goes into effect, so that their petitions can be filed um, when the law goes into effect, and we've been able to successfully do that for some folks. I, for one, have been, fielding calls from people from all over Pennsylvania, really looking into their record, talking to them about whether they're eligible or not, and informing them often of their fines and fees and how to, um, get into a payment plan and start taking care of things. We've been able to help reduce the amount for folks in really specific ways, depending on what the particular fines and fees were for. Like we can help people waive supervision fees. So that has been a large part of our work even before the law went into effect. And I do see it as a huge issue because we're talking about people who um, are already who are struggling already. So when you take on top of that the fact that they have to pay out these fines and fees, and that's the um, thing that's getting in their way of being able to seal their record, it is a huge issue. And CLS has recognized that and has proactively taken steps to help people out.
And the law, and you've touched on this a few different times in your answers. The law right now, we're in a position where basically you're doing you've done a lot of preliminary work in terms of determining who has outstanding fines, how to help them pay it off, how to reduce it. But then shifting into June, many, as you mentioned, a lot of these types of offenses that are subject to a seal will automatically be sealed as those individuals who have been convicted mark 10 years without a conviction. In turn, can you talk a little bit about, I guess you're in a rather, what seems like a pretty intense moment right now where you're trying to be ahead of the game and get people the help they need right away. I guess how do you see that kind of transitioning into June, where a lot of this will be more automatic, but at the same time maybe there's glitches, maybe there's
Right.
people who fall through the cracks, that sort of thing.
So with automatic sealing, the outstanding court fines and fees is going to be an issue for that now. It's going to be an issue for that also.
Gotcha.
It won't be auto sealed. There's still fines and fees, and so that's another thing. Like we're going to keep this up. So CLS has a clean slate screening project where we're both. Well, I guess we'll touch on this later too, but through the screening project, that's going to also help us between June 2019 and June 2020. It's going to really help us. Kind of tap into the automatic sealing and troubleshoot the issues with fines and fees and any other glitches that you brought up. So I think that's another one of the things that we've implemented to kind of get in front of any possible issues that could come up between before the automatic sealing goes into effect.
And now you mentioned earlier one of the things that some of the women that you've come to really focus on or focus your project around, a lot of them are dealing with penalties or hardships due to convictions, and they never even saw jail time. It's time for me, if I haven't already shown my ignorance. One of the features of Clean Slate that surprised me is that it automatically seals arrests that do not result in convictions. And ignorantly, I've always thought that unless it was a very public trial or something like that, that an arrest without conviction doesn't kind of carry with somebody long term. Obviously, that might be a little different now with Google and people and police reports and that sort of thing. So that's obviously a different animal now than maybe it was years ago. But I guess can you talk a little bit about the effect of an arrest without a conviction on kind of how in the kind of the potential employer aspect that you've kind of focused your work around?
Yeah, so I think that's what you just described is true for what people think when they're in those situations. They think, oh, I've been arrested. There was a court hearing. It was thrown out. Nothing happened. Like that shouldn't be on my record anymore. And the truth is that it still is there, and people have to take steps to get those non-convictions arrests that did not lead to a conviction expunged. And that's the support that we provide at Community Legal Services. But it has a very real effect because when those charges show up on your criminal record, people are looking at those at face value. They're not looking at the disposition that says, withdrawn or dismissed or no prize. That basically means this person wasn't convicted, not guilty, acquitted, whatever. They're not looking at the disposition that says this person wasn't convicted. They're looking at the charge, and they're that's when the stigma comes about. And so it has presented a very real barrier. We still see people coming through our intake, coming to CLS, saying that they've been denied employment because of their record. And when we look on their record, these are arrests that did not lead to convictions. And
Mm-hmm.
these are wrong. These considerations aren't allowed to be made, and that's when we step in and we advocate on behalf of clients and talk to employers and let them know that those considerations can't be made. And we do help a lot of people get their jobs back that way. But it has been a very, very real barrier because um, people still don't understand that they can't consider that, and it gets in the way of people who are just trying to do work, go to work.
And in those instances, those will automatically be sealed just as certain
Right,
convictions.
right,
Okay. And that's going to be beginning in June. Now, it's for somebody who's interested in this subject, you're obviously in a great place because CLS has taken a leading role here in Pennsylvania, and there's also been a lot of partnerships with the Pennsylvania Bar
right.
Association, with Center for American Progress, with the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry, and there's a number of other entities. Can you talk a little bit about obviously, that's kind of a cool thing to see all these kinds of groups gathering together around this. But can you talk a little bit about the coordination and interaction you've seen, I guess, in between these groups? I guess has CLS taken, I guess, one portion and kind of
Right,
focused on that? Is it more intertwined? I guess, how have you seen that play out?
right. So I wasn't a part of these conversations, but of course, like get to hear about them and see it all unfold just as everyone else. But I think the really cool thing about Clean Slate is that it really garnered a lot of bipartisan support from national and local groups and people from both sides of the aisle in Harrisburg. And I think that's because Clean Slate is recognized as a common sense reform. It's something everybody can get behind, and it saves resources for everyone, and it makes it easy for people to get relief so
Mm-hmm.
that they can become employed and get better employment, get high growth employment, and really, contribute to society the way all of us does, just to be not treated like a second class person anymore. And I think that that's something that everyone can get behind. Um, so so far as the partnerships and the connections, I think that that support from everybody is something that has been a real thing that helped Clean Slate go as far as it did. And even in that, we recognize that um, Clean Slate is a building block in that sense. Like we weren't able to capture everything that everybody wanted, but it was a building block to say like, here's a starting point to really make a real difference in the lives of people who have before been um, on the outskirts of employment. So I think I think that's been, in my opinion, that's been the major thing I've seen so far as people partnering together behind this.
And in particular, CLS and the PA Bar have taken on, I guess, an even more pronounced role, or maybe a more on the ground role in terms of consultations with potentially eligible individuals at this point. And obviously, as you mentioned, a lot of that work, including the fines and fees, will continue even when Clean Slate becomes more automated in the coming months. I guess you've touched on it at bits and pieces throughout our conversation. But I guess what are you seeing in terms of the impact, in terms of what you're hearing, your common themes, common threads from people, in your position, kind of on the ground. Obviously, a very young attorney, but or a very, very young fellow, but you're still kind of engaged in this regard.
So one thing we've seen is that over 7,000 people have reached out to ask for help getting their records screened across the state, and we're working to train volunteer lawyers to help match people for screenings. But it's a work in progress. I mean, we've seen a lot of people who will be helped, and like I said, I've been taking a lot of um, calls from people from different counties, and even if because CLS can't help people, we don't work with people who are outside of Philadelphia.
Mm.
Even if I'm just there and helping people, like, hey, like this is the legal services organization in your respective county who's doing this work, contact them. So even if I'm just helping people get to the right organization to provide them support, that's one step of the way. If it's a case that is in Philadelphia and we can help them, like now I can help get them through the door of CLS earlier. So, um, but through the screening project, we're just recruiting a lot of different volunteer attorneys to be able to meet the demand.
Mm.
There's 7,000 people reaching out to us already, so um, we're really trying to meet the need that's out there, and I think that goes to show that um, Clean Slate was very, very necessary. It went into like you said, it went into effect right before the new year, and already so many people have reached out trying to see if they're eligible. So it just sounds like this is something a lot of folks have been waiting for and have been needing. So um, it's really cool to be a part of this and seeing different people volunteer their services to help people be able to move forward with their lives.
And I'm assuming the PA Bar Association, that's been helpful in terms of finding
Yeah,
people for, if they're in a kind of more rural or more outskirt kind of county, finding them assistance. Um, I guess to circle back on the original goal of your fellowship project, which obviously, as you mentioned earlier, is really focused on finding meaningful opportunities for women of color to, with criminal backgrounds to move on in their lives, find meaningful employment. I guess I've read a number of different, I guess, opinion pieces on this piece of legislation, which, to your point, I think
right.
it passed in Harrisburg like 198 to 2. So it's obviously, as you mentioned, very popular with bipartisan support. And I guess the goal that was mentioned was presumably if you seal nonviolent crimes from 10 plus years ago from criminal background checks, you're eliminating what you're describing as a pretty prominent barrier to employment. From what you've learned so far, and I do expect, I do appreciate that this is very new and that you've only been a fellow for a few months. But I guess how do you see this kind of touching or achieving the kinds of goals that you would like, or that's going to kind of work out the way it's planned?
Yeah, so I think CLS has already been in conversations to talk about what's next. For instance, I know I want to see more around including sealing drug felony offenses because we can go on about the war on drugs, but
Mm.
I think as a person who's doing a project about the needs of women of color and girls who have come into contact with the criminal justice system, the war on drugs have affected women as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that I would like to see drug felonies be included in what can be sealed. Um, and I think overall, like just even outside of the clean slate world, I guess a part of it too. Just seeing more progression in the world of licensing reform and ending really restrictive laws that kind of really create a bar to employment for people who don't need to be excluded. So I think I have a lot of visions for improvements I want to see on behalf of the people that I work with as a whole. But for Clean Slate, I definitely am interested in seeing drug felonies be included.
And is that what you were referring to earlier? I think when we were talking about, I guess,
Yeah,
how it's going to,
yeah,
you mentioned, I guess, a building block. I guess, is that what you're referring to
yeah,
here?
yeah. That is, I mean, we're already we're given the need of people who have come. Clearly, Clean Slate was something that was already people really needed this. It's helping a lot of people. But for the building block, like for the people who still, who have felonies, who can't get those sealed under a clean slate, if we can start with the drug felonies, I think that would be a building block. And I think that that's the conversation CLS is definitely, like I can't speak on behalf of CLS, but I think
Naturally, yeah.
that those are conversations that are being had. Those conversations are being had.
And is that something from, I guess, your perspective? Speaking with obviously your fellowship is really focused on the employment issues, and obviously Clean Slate intersects a lot. But do you, I guess, see a lot of people at this point, or at least several examples of people who could really benefit from Clean Slate, but maybe, as your point, maybe their past offense is a drug offense, and so they're kind of not, they're kind of just on the outskirts of what Clean Slate can help with.
answer? What was the?
Sure.
What was the
So
beginning part of that
I guess
question?
my question is I guess, are you seeing that on firsthand in terms of people who would otherwise benefit from clean slate, but based off of the type of conviction they had in the
Right.
past, they're maybe just outside of the reach of how clean slate is currently set up.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, there's people who aren't eligible because of the type of offense that's on there. Maybe, they have an M1 in a particular category, like they have for a particular offense that if you have an M1 for that type of offense, it's excluded. Or so we see people who because of those type of offenses, aren't eligible for clean slate. But we're taking stock of all of that stuff. We're taking of how many people are being excluded based on what types of offenses, and I think that we're really paying attention to what the needs out there continue to be. And like I said, because a clean slate is a building block, all of that information is necessary. Even though people aren't able to be helped right now, that's still information that is important for us to have when we talk about, what needs to be done next. Like, how do we move forward and be able to help more people?
Understood. And Tracy, I've taken up a lot of your time, but I would like to end on the same question we've asked all of our guests. Some of us in law school, we do end the week with a beer or two at the local bar, and obviously people do get. Maybe you did this last year, I don't know, but if you're anything like us, some of us do talk about current events, the law, and just kind of
Right.
naturally things like this come up because, to your point, Clean Slate's very bipartisan. It's been in pretty much every major newspaper in the state. And so our last guest urged me not to be the guy who talks about law after class, but assuming I or a peer do not take that advice, what about clean slate or expungements or employment for individuals with convictions or anything like that? I guess strikes you as particularly interesting or particularly meaningful to you. And I guess if this kind of conversation does come up among friends, among family members, just in I guess kind of social conversation, you know what do you hope people are talking about on this subject?
I first hope that people are humanizing people with records. I think that that's a large part, like when you get to change the narrative around just the humanity of people as a whole, and what you, when we begin to think more positively about the transformative, effects and value of allowing people to start over and start anew and not continue to be held back by their records. When we start to look at people as other people, like humans who have lives, who have families to support, who have grown, when I would hope that the conversations are more positive about the people who are directly impacted by this, because um, I think really the narrative um, is really important to even be able to get something like Clean Slate off the books. If people thought very badly, we wouldn't have been able to get such bipartisan support. But I think everyone recognized, like, no, look, this makes sense. Like, this is something that we should work on. We should allow people to be employed and get better employment and be able to take care of themselves and their families. Like, I think that that was a huge thing. So I think that continuing to humanize people with records. Like, I would hope that that was where the conversation landed. And I think that Clean Slate is a starting point for that, because people are able to overcome that stigma now with not having their records available to certain employers or institutions or landlord or whoever could potentially use it to deny them. And I just look forward to continue efforts in the future, because I think that it just benefits us as a whole. Like, it just benefits everyone, not just the people who are directly affected by it, but it benefits all of us when we're all doing work to help everyone do well.
Excellent. Well, Tracy, thank you so much. It's really cool to hear a recent grad and what you're up to and the kind of the where you are. So this has been really a great pleasure. Thank you so much for coming by.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's just really, really cool to connect with Temple Law again. So I really appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent. Well, best of luck to you.
Thank you. You have a great one.
Take care.